All right, guys, so today we're going to take a look at is working with layers, lesson 10. So what I want to just do first is just kind of quick review on Blackboard where everything is and where you should be finding all this stuff, and then we'll get started in on the lesson, and then once we have that all wrapped up, I'm going to introduce the next project for you guys. So jump into Blackboard underneath weekly assignments. We're on lesson 10. This will be due next Thursday by end of day. Really just about organizing your artwork and kind of keeping things maintained within it. So there's a lot of different stuff that we have inside of here. Most of this, though, is in reference to the extension project. There really isn't a whole lot. This fonts here, actually, you can ignore this because the fonts aren't required anymore. This is from the last lesson. So, but if you want to copy approximate Nova, there you go, free one. So the top of the video, this is just kind of a little reference on working with layers, but I'm obviously going to demo all this stuff for you. So here's the lesson 10 start files. If you click and download those and pop it open, you're going to see a file that looks like this. This is the lesson 10 start file. There's a secondary file inside that folder. This sizes. This is going to be something that we're going to open and copy and paste in as a separate layer. So we'll just kind of keep this as our start point for right now. Now, the big idea within layers in Illustrator, and this is something you guys have probably seen quite a bit in Photoshop. When you're working in Photoshop, layers is really your stacking order. It's how you make things appear in front of or behind each other. We've seen so far in Illustrator, it doesn't exactly work like that. It's kind of a little bit different, whereas like if we're going to stack them forwards or backwards, it's going to be more about that right click, select the object, right click, and then arrange forward, backward. Now, we're doing this kind of visually and just making it look like how it looks as we build everything together. But the bigger piece here, the other thing to kind of consider is that it's not just magically doing this stuff. There's a memory of where this all exists, and that's all inside that layers panel in Illustrator. So let's take a look on the zoom up, just kind of see it on my whiteboard. So it looks like I got this kind of little mobile app mock-up. I've got this image I need to do something with. That's about it, so we're good there. And then I want to go into my window menu and down to where it says layers. It's also going to pop up with this little icon right here. And this is going to be a big piece of how we're working today. Now, if you look at it, it says layer 1. Layers are kind of a little bit deceiving in how they're kind of set up in Illustrator. Like it just says layer 1, but there's lots of pieces or objects within this layer. So what we can do is we can actually build separate layers and kind of maintain different parts to this. I'll be honest with you, a lot of times I'm not using layers a ton in Illustrator. The only time I'm using them is when I have all sorts of multiple objects or different pieces of things, or stuff that I want to turn on and off in big pieces. Just like in Photoshop, we've got this whole like visibility thing where we can turn it off individual parts, or we can turn off the layer as a whole. So it depends on kind of what you're working on. But with this, I tend to think of layers as almost like a way to kind of big picture organize. There's certain people that I've worked with, so like I've developed promotional stuff for the graphic design department with Joel. Joel's super into organizing layers, especially if he's working with someone else, because that allows him to just kind of keep things organized and well maintained. So with this, what I'm going to be doing is kind of taking a look at how this is set up and then building some new layers and just kind of seeing what it is I have. So what I first want to do is I want to take a little tour of this layers panel with you guys, just to kind of see what everything is, kind of how it all works. There are a couple of little kind of quick things in here that I think are very helpful. All right, now, again, we saw this already. If I click on these little eyeballs, how this turns off visibility. This is kind of a fast way of finding things. On the opposite side here, there's these little kind of circles. And if I click on these are actually a quick way of selecting. So this is how I can target a selection. So if I'm trying to find something or I want to quick only select certain things, or maybe I'll use my Command key and I'll click multiples, I can grab lots of different pieces all at once and quick target them to do a quick selection. Sometimes this is a lot easier, especially when you have a lot of things stacked against each other in detail. Third thing I want to take a look at here is how this is actually set up here. So I've got some things where like if it's text, it just displays it, but the rest of it doesn't give you very descriptive names. So here, like image, I guess that makes sense, but if I look at this is probably like my title. So if I double click on these, I can actually start renaming them and start getting myself a little bit more organized. I'm gonna go in, I'm gonna rename all these things. Their background, That's just my background. I got some groups here. So it looks like this is the background. I've got my add button. Text makes sense. Here I've got description. And I got some stuff that's hidden. I can't really see what any of this is doing. Oh, I guess this one doesn't make sense. This looks like this is the body of the template. Okay. But I got some stuff that I can't really see what's going on. So just like we're doing in Photoshop, where we can take things, you can kind of click and drag and rearrange them. Now by dragging this black box, I'm seeing these other pieces here. So here's my footer icon. I can see it. I'm going to hit this little target button and see. Okay, and it looks like this looks like this is a little scroll. I'll call it a scroll. So now I kind of have a better idea what all these things are, like the names. It's not just generic descriptions. So first thing, that's probably what I want to do is just kind of get everything organized. The other part too is I'll see how I have these little drop-down menus, and here I can kind of see like now within these groups, like there's my basket icon, here's my text, and then here's my little bat indicator. I'm not going to name my subgroups. I think if I have a group's name, that's okay. But I just want to make sure that I can see that if I have things grouped together, it'll actually indicate this with this little drop down and show me all these things selected as one piece or selected individually. So far, so good. That making sense? All right. So what I want to take a look at next then is now that I have all these layers kind of organized, what I want to do is actually want to make some additional layers here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build in kind of like separate chunks. So I want to build something for like my background, something for my phone content. I'm going to kind of create new layers. And the nice part about this is when I build new layers, it's going to color code them. So right now when I click on everything, you see how it's got this blue highlight. But what I'm going to do is I haven't really looked at this yet, but at the bottom of my layers panel here, this is a little closer. I've got a couple other things that I can look at. So I've got this little search indicator. I can locate an object. I can create layers. I can delete things that I've selected. Sublayers can be clipping masks releases. So there's kind of a couple little things that we'll try today. Now what I'm going to do first though is I'm going to make 2 new layers. I'm going to make one for one body. This to the bottom. And then I'm going to throw this template in. So what I can do is I can click and drag. And if I do this correctly, this thing selected, I can drag it into this new layer, and now it shows up here. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to build one for content, so all my main stuff that's going to go inside my display area, that'll be my content folder. And then my last one that I'm going to create, so I'm going to kind of build them for all the different pieces here. I'm going to build one called menus. So now what I can do is I can kind of start taking some of these things and dragging them up into these different areas. Now, as I click on these things, so now if I select this whole menu, take a look. It has it in green. It's just indicating that I have this on a separate layer. So when I'm working on building these things, I want to kind of pay attention to how this is all taken care of, how this is all set up. So if I'm going to be working with these things as kind of like separate layers, and I'm clicking on stuff, well, obviously here I know it's going to be green because I'm clicking on it. But if I'm just working with my layers panel closed, and say I grab this background piece, and then I grab that. Now that light up, that color change is indicating that I'm working on separate layers. The reason why that's important is that the layers stack, how I have this menus on top, this is always going to appear in front of all those other elements. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw all these pieces up here. Make sure my title appears, and again, I lost it because I had it hidden back behind it. Nice and bright. So again, the stacking order and how I put all this is going to matter. Same thing with my footer, or my icons right above it. Again, if I'm not seeing things appear correctly, it's that stacking order that I have inside of this. So now if I click my description, my cost, I add the bag button, my general background, and I can include this background on the body. So now I've got kind of separate stuff for all my different pieces. So now if I'm going to turn this off and kind of set things one at a time, now I've got different areas to kind of keep all my content organized. Does that make sense? And I can kind of really get into some specifics of how I'm subdividing and how I'm kind of working through all this stuff together. Yeah, none of this stuff is too different. None of it is really that difficult. It's just a matter of kind of dragging and dropping and reorganizing and reordering everything as you go. Now, just like before, like I've seen this happen before, like maybe I accidentally move something around, I swore there's supposed to be buttons there. Remember, if you ever lose anything, we always have that view menu, so that we can go into that outline view. And there, now I see this stuff. Okay, well here it is. Now I know the problem. Like if it's on there, I have it selected right here. You see this little indicator, like I know that I can drag this back up. So as far as kind of like problem solving stuff, a real fast way of jumping back and forth between outline and preview to be able to see all those different pieces. So again, like none of this stuff is super earth shattering. It's really just a matter of knowing that it's there and being able to turn things on and off as you're working. Now what I want to do is I'm actually going to make a new layer and I'm going to try and trap some content into it. So what I want to do is I want to take that layer and I want to build some new art to kind of snap into it. So I've got this photo and I want this photo to kind of sit like right here. But the problem is I don't want it behind this menu. I want to kind of snap this inside of the box. So what I'm going to do is with my content layer selected, if I make new art, it's only going to make the art on whatever layer I have active. So because I have the content one, if I click and drag the new box, say like right here, it makes that new rectangle right inside that area. So because that's how I'm building it, if I were to say exit and down my menus and had this as my active as I was working, it would build it on there, but again, that's not what I want. So now what I'm going to do is I got this box and I want to build this thing as a mask. So I got this little blank box. It's just full of a basic like light gray color. What I want to do is I want to make this image get trapped inside that box. So what I want to do is I want to pay attention here. I'm going to call this my frame, that new rectangle that I just drew. And here is a photo. What I'm going to do is I'm going to mask these two. I'm going to make this photo hidden inside of this box. Now, it's not going to delete all the other edges. It's just going to trap it inside that area so that all this excess that I'm seeing around it won't be selectable. Now, in order to do this, I just need two things. I need an image or a shape, an image, and then a shape that it's going to be forced into. The stacking order is really important here, though. So I want to make sure I have my photo behind it and my blank frame in front of it, and I need to have both of them selected. So if I hold my shift key, I can click on that other box, or I can hold shift and click on these two together. But now I have them both selected. So now that I have them selected, what I'm going to do is go to Object, clipping mask, and Make. And now it snaps that photo into that frame. And these are still individually editable objects. So now if I need to make my frame bigger or smaller or rotate it or change any of the properties on it, I can adjust that. Same thing with my photo here. If I have this photo and I decide that I want to change my position, if I don't like where he's situated right now, I'll select the photo, and then just using my regular move tool, now I can take him and resize him. And notice if I go inside that frame and there's nothing there, I'm not going to see it all. So maybe I want to make this thing bigger or smaller. I can scale this as well. Scale this thing up a little bit. Give him some look room so it's like mountains there. So I'm happy with my positioning. And I click away to deselect, and now all of that is snapped right together in this one big group with the frame of the photo. Does that make sense? And again, one more time when I'm doing that. Yes. Release it back into how it was originally set up. I'm going to build a box, so I'm going to build a frame. I'm going to set it in front of the photo. Select them both, and then do that object, click and mask make, just to snap it. And then again, if I need to edit anything, I can click on the individual frame, or the photo to reposition, or resize the frame that sits inside. So now that I got that taken care of, I think the next thing I'm going to do is I want to play around with my positioning. Remember I had that other object? Let's pull that open. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click back into my file. I had that sizes thing. Now, there's a couple different ways you can drag Illustrator stuff in. I can double click to open this, or I could just drag this straight into here. And because it's an Illustrator document, it recognizes exactly what it is. So here, I can drag it and drop it in. Now, notice it acts a little bit funny here, like how it acts like a new file. So now when I select this thing, I can, instead of linking this, I can just click this little embed button here. That's fine, text is an outline. Okay, so now if I click on these objects, it's a group. And all my separate pieces, my circles, all the different pieces of this group are all individual. They're just put together as one big group. So I'm going to call this sizes. And now you can see, I grab it, it acts as one big piece. And now if I want to like resize this, scale it, or reposition it, I kind of want to make this look like a scroller so that I can scroll left or right across the screen to see different sizes. So these a little bit bigger, position down. I might change my text down too. Grab this and grab that as well. Shift these guys down a little bit. So now I can import other objects, but this is really informative here because when I see my layers, if something acts up its plane, by clicking on it, it's showing me, well, it's an embedded file or a linked file. So now I can come back up here and then embed that right in, versus just copy pasting. So you're going to see that kind of appear a little bit differently as well. So again, pretty straightforward stuff, nothing too like crazy. It's just a way of kind of thinking about organizing and ordering all your information. So just kind of wanted to run that past you guys just so you can kind of get a better sense of different ways to organize and work with your art. So what you're going to do is, once you're wrapped up with that, you're going to stop and save this thing. This is just a straight up image. There's nothing extra on here. So if you want to save this thing as a JPEG and send it, that's fine. Otherwise, if you want to save this thing as a PDF, either way is fine with me. Generally, when we have multiple artboards, again, PDFs are better because then it just embeds everything together in one big file. So I'm going to stop and save this quick. I'm just going to save the PDF just like that. I think I'm in the habit of that. Make it look a little bit better. Save it to PDF. Last name dash description. Save it. All the default settings are good. And there we go. That's it for this week's lesson. So obviously all this has been recorded, so if you need to go back and see these steps again, all the stuff's in the book. Again, this is probably one of the shortest chapters in the book. It's very simple, very straightforward stuff. It's just a matter of kind of walking through, making sure you're comfortable with how that layers works. So with that wrapped up, I'm going to close this thing. And what I'm going to do is jump into the extension project for this week. So I kind of have some additional stuff here. We're going to start with this project. It's a shape-based logo, and I'll walk you guys through all this. Now, the idea for this is that you're going to create a custom logo using all the different pieces that we've been working together so far. So the pen tools, shape tools, type tools, all the different pieces of things that we've kind of been building towards. This is the first chance that we're going to get to kind of put it all together into one big thing. Color, all the different objects, all the different options that we have. So what you're going to do is you're going to create 5 different versions of both black and white and color. Now it says preliminary, so start in black and white. Build those first. When you're done, you'll submit a color version of each logo as well. Now, you're going to create a logo for a new local coffee shop. It's called Recharge. They specialize in classic coffee stuff, but they offer a lot of workspace, high-speed Wi-Fi, outlets for device charging, kind of like workstations. So the idea is this company, they're called Recharge. So it's like a workspace and coffee house. So what you're going to do is you're going to come up with some rough sketches. Now, if you want to do these in pencil, that's cool. Sometimes, like I've done this, and I'll show you this, like where I'll sketch stuff and then I'll scan it. I'll kind of use it as like a base for tracing. If you're not super great like pencil, and not all of us are, it's kind of like the fallacy of designers. Like I'm more of a digital person than I am like a pen and paper person. Really, what everything works best for you in terms of process is fine with you. Now, you're going to create some general rough ideas. I'm going to walk you through a little ideation process of ways to kind of come up with different thoughts of how you can build things. You're going to have customized text, custom shapes with a pen tool. Make sure your logo is proportional. It's kind of got a nice balance to it. It isn't like all heavy on one side. It's created in black and white, and then you'll give me a color version as well. But again, one of my rules is I always build logos. I never present the logo to a client in color until I get it to work in black and white. Color should just be kind of like the cherry on the sundae. It shouldn't be the thing that is required to make the logo work. The other thing you guys want to think about in terms of logo creation is logos should be very simple, but they should be produced evenly, small, like can be tiny little icon on a website or big like the side of the truck. So when you're thinking about logos, they should be a little bit more on the simple side, and that they should have a very clear message. So when you're looking at kind of building all that stuff, that's one way you want to think about it. Now, each example, you should have a sketch or a rough idea. I'll leave that kind of up to you guys. I'm not super concerned about this one. It's just really whatever works best in terms of process for you. You should have a set of custom shapes created with a pen tool for each logo. Each example should have customized text, customized objects, and then your finished version has proper use of formats using swatches, a color guide, that you're using colors that have some consistency or have some complement, or you use like a monochromatic color palette for your logo. Whatever you think works best, you'll kind of see as you go through this. So that's the basic idea, but I think it makes a little bit more sense if you can kind of see this in terms of some examples and kind of some thought process. Sample file here. And this open, and then we jump back into ideation. Okay. So now you know what the project is. The next thing is coming up with ideas. So I think that like the big thing that like, at least for me, like as a younger designer, I was always super intimidated by this. Like, okay, well, like how do you come up with a good idea? Like, what is something that's visual that hasn't been done 1,000 times before? I think coming up with a process for yourself is really helpful. This is the one that has always worked for me. I'll create like these little key charts. So I'm kind of thinking about like how I want to represent this business. I want people to be able to see this logo and have an understanding of what they do before they know anything about it. It should also be something that's really simple and recognizable for both kind of aspects of what it is that they're doing in terms of like their business. So obviously, like there's a lot of kind of moving parts to this. So rather than just kind of like thinking like, oh, I'll just like start clicking on stuff in the miracle occur, I want to think about process. So what I like to do is kind of like a brainstorm activity, is a little teacher. So like the one side of the house, they're doing like technology or office or kind of workspace stuff. The other side is like their classic coffee shop. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to think of like basic symbols, basic imagery, and just come up with a list of them. This is by no way a complete list. This is just kind of a starting point. But okay, so like a Wi-Fi symbol, a plug, a cable, a string, a mouse, like electricity, a battery, all that kind of stuff. And then I'm thinking about like cups and pots and spoons and sardines and all those different things. So then what I can start doing is when I have these lists of words next to each other, I can kind of start cross-referencing them. Like a Wi-Fi symbol maybe like coming out of a coffee pot instead of steam, or maybe a plug that's coming out of a spoon, or a plug that's coming out of a cup. So I can kind of start cross-referencing these things and then start coming up with like rough ideas of how I could combine those two for logos. So that's why I say that sketch part. When I'm sketching stuff, my sketches are super rough. But I like to just like, if I'm going to think about like what a Wi-Fi symbol on a spoon might look like, well, if I do a rough sketch, it's a lot faster than trying to come up with something in Illustrator that might take 4 or 5 times as long, and then I'm going to do good in the end. So I want to make sure that when I'm building these things, I'm kind of thinking ahead of time about how it could work. So maybe like a little like lightning bolt icon that's inside of, I don't know, like a coffee cup, something like that. So that's how I kind of started coming up with ideas and coming up with sketches. So once I had that, then what I did was I was doing kind of like these rough sketches, and then I came in and I kind of did like a more refined version, and I looked at the fonts, and then I found some other things. I tried it with the battery, and I kind of curved it around, and then you see here I try to do like a more simple, like flat version. It was just like this cup with this little like lightning, the little text on the saucer. So I started kind of taking that original idea and then started running some variations on it and using that as a way to develop it. Again, I'm only working in black and white to get started off with. Once I have my black and whites, I have a color simple. I can just make one of these, copy paste it. So that's really the idea with this. Now, I'm not going to rush you guys on this. What I'm going to do is we'll have a lesson. We had a lesson this week. Next week, we're going to do another lesson on working with like some different like, effects in Illustrator. So next week, there will be no extension project. We'll have this week and next week to work on these. So what I recommend doing is kind of work at this and think about the workflow that I just explained. Start with that T-chart. Start with some basic sketches. Once you kind of, I generally, like, if I'm going to sketch out stuff, I'll try to come up with like maybe 15, 20 things, pick out my 5 favorites, throw them in Illustrator, and just start putting stuff. So don't think that you need to do this all in one shot. I kind of think about this in steps, come up with some ideas, do some rough sketches, take a little break, see if you can come up with anything else. Once you're solid on that, throw that stuff in Illustrator, start sketching it, start kind of coming up with some roughs of that, and then you can kind of step forward and refining down. So again, you have 2 weeks to work on these, but that's generally the process that I like to follow and the steps that I think work best. Are any questions jumping with you guys on this? So everything that you guys need for this is all supplied on there. What I'm going to do is I'll be hanging out for the rest of the class today, just answering questions, whether it's about the lesson, last week's project, or this week's. But what I recommend doing is a couple things. First off, check in Grade Center, make sure I got everything that's turned in from you. If you're missing anything, work kind of from the most, like, the thing that's furthest back and kind of work your way forward. I just think it's going to be easier in terms of getting everything done. I will be working on getting return grades entered through the rest of the day today. So whatever's in the grade book as of right now, that is going to show up as a return. Keep in mind your return grade is not calculated as part of your final. It's just kind of like a checkpoint of where you're at as of right now. So first thing, aim backward. Once you have that taken care of, I recommend wrapping up this week's lesson and just start kind of coming up with some ideas. And again, I'll be hanging out to answer questions, whether it's about missing work, whether it's about last week's lesson, this week's projects, any of that stuff. And then as far as kind of moving forward, we're getting pretty close to the end of the lessons. I think we have 3 more after this, and we're going to be jumping into projects. So we're kind of, as far as, like, I think we're in really good shape to give us plenty of time to do some nice work on the project and have some time to really get the concepts fully without having to rush through everything. So if you guys have any questions, I'll be hanging out in the room. I'm going to kill the recording right now, and then you guys can just fire away with whatever you got. Thanks.